Newsflash, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, aka CMS, released not one, but 2 memos in the last quarter regarding guidelines that are causing ripples in the workers' compensation arena. Stay tuned because you won't want to miss this episode of the Z Settlement Channel as we have a special guest ready to explain in detail what these memos mean. Welcome back to the Z Settlement Channel. I'm your host, Chris Chan. Today, we're addressing new guidelines released by CMS on January 10th regarding non-submit Medicare set-asides and their update to that memo in their updated guidelines handbook. But before that, a quick overview on how Medicare plays a role in the workers' compensation arena. Welcome to our special installment of Medicare Matters. So what is Medicare? When many people hear Medicare, they immediately think health insurance for those over the age of 65 who have paid Medicare taxes for over 40 quarters over their work history. But that's not the only part of what Medicare is. While Medicare is available for those over the age of 65, younger people with disabilities or people with end-stage renal disease also qualify. Moreover, if you have applied and are eligible to receive Social Security disability insurance, you automatically become eligible for Medicare within 24 months. So why does this matter in workers' compensation? Well, Medicare has stated that if an individual who has an open workers' compensation claim has a reasonable expectation to enroll in Medicare within 30 months of a settlement date, the settling parties must consider Medicare's interest when settling the claim. Medicare is a secondary payer for medical care to an eligible Medicare beneficiary. When an individual is hurt on the job, treatment or medical care for procedures needed could be covered by Medicare. However, since the injury occurred while on the job, Medicare wants the employer or the employer's insurance company to pay for the care and treatment of the work-related injury that otherwise would be covered by Medicare. Medicare has 2 basic parts. Coverage A, generally pertaining to hospitalization, and Coverage B, pertaining to doctor office visits, lab tests, durable medical equipment, and physical therapy. Coverage D is an optional supplemental coverage for prescription medication. CMS issued formal memorandum in 2001, referred to as the Patel Memorandum, which served notice to the world the formalized policy relative to Medicare beneficiaries. This memo referenced to medical set-asides, or MSAs, to protect Medicare's statutory secondary payer status. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services recommends that before a settlement is finalized, the Medicare set-aside report be submitted to CMS for approval. This gives CMS the opportunity to ensure all future Medicare-related medical expenses are covered by a Medicare set-aside as part of the settlement. These guidelines are considered recommendations by CMS and are not required, although all parties are required to consider Medicare's interest whether or not they decide to obtain a CMS approval. Because CMS review process was vague, indeed, submission for formal approval remains optional even in the current handbook. It led many to believe that an MSA did not need to be submitted for formal approval. This led to the creation of non-submit, evidence-based MSA products. Here to talk about the memo changes issued in January of this year is our special guest. He is the head of CP Resolutions, a Ringler strategic partner, and he is also an expert in the Medicare arena, and he's also an aspiring Chinese cuisine chef. Please welcome Greg Bashaw. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks, Chris. I'm glad to be here.
Hey, Greg, how's your Chinese cooking doing?
It's funny you should ask that. I've been doing a lot. I've been doing a lot of that and some meat smoking as well, and I'm getting a lot better than we were back when we did the class last year.
I'm really glad to hear that. I'm glad you're enjoying your time in the kitchen. But anyways, Greg, can you give us your expert opinion on the memo that was released as well as the subsequent clarification to that memo?
You bet. So there were 2 memos. So there were 2 actually additions to the workers' comp Medicare set-aside reference guide that have been added this year. So the first one came out on January 10th of this year. And oh boy, when that came out, that was the shot heard round the world. It really caught fire in the industry, and there was good reason for it catching the attention of everybody. It was just one single paragraph in a new section, section 4.3, and what it was addressing the issue of workers' comp Medicare set-asides not submitted to CMS for review. And basically in there, it looked like what they were saying is you really must submit your workers' comp MSAs for review or be subject to penalties. They used very strong language to get this across. So in there it said that CMS will deny payments up to exhaustion of the total settlement minus total workers' comp settlement minus procurement costs before they will again pay before Medicare would pay for treatment for the injuries that are underlying the settlement, as opposed to just allowing the Medicare set aside to exhaust and then Medicare kicking in those payments again. In addition to that, it was silent as to whether you could prove that your non-submitted MSA was going to be sufficient upon exhaustion. And then there were a couple of questions that were left wide open. It didn't address the issue of under threshold settlements, because as you know, that if the claimant is already a Medicare beneficiary, there's a threshold that has to be met for the total settlement before you can submit the MSA for review. That amount is $25,000. And if they're expected to become a Medicare beneficiary, but aren't yet a Medicare beneficiary within 30 months, then that threshold is $250,000. So this paragraph that seemed to be requiring that all MSAs be submitted for review didn't say anything about under threshold MSAs. And then finally, there was a question about retroactive applicability. So this section was positioned as a clarification as to something that was new, basically saying, hey, the law and the rules as they currently exist, we're just clarifying what they actually mean. And if it's a clarification, the question is, all right, does this apply to all MSAs that have ever been created? And so these were left wide open, and people weren't frankly sure what to do. I think there were a lot of companies and plaintiffs' attorneys that we saw out there that simply decided beginning January 10th, or once they learned about this, they were just going to submit everything. And the other side of this is just from a practical standpoint. We all knew that Medicare didn't have the capacity to have every single Medicare set-aside submitted for review, and that a great big backlog was going to happen. Well, they had CMS had a town hall meeting, so it's an online webinar where industry could give feedback on the new section in the reference guide, and everybody knew that fireworks were going to be flying, and it did not disappoint. So people, you kind of let them have it and just ask their questions and express their frustration about this new section. And it was obvious that a clarification of the clarification was needed and was inevitable. So it was going to come out. And so on March 21st, CMS did do exactly that. So they released a clarification of the clarification in section 4.3. And they basically just added new language to address the issues that were left unaddressed in the original language. So one of the things they did in the new language is that they said that instead of saying they will deny payments, if you haven't submitted this Medicare set aside for review and you exhaust the set aside, they changed the word will to may. So they said now, instead of saying we're going to do it, we're always going to do it, they're basically saying we have the discretion to do it. We have the ability, we have the right to make this decision. And in addition to that, they added additional language that said that not only if they denied payments up to the total workers' comp settlement less procurement costs, they were also going to allow that conditional payments paid to Medicare already to be subtracted from that amount that needed to be exhausted before they would kick in payments for treatment for injury or illnesses related to the settlement. Next is that they put in there explicitly a right for claimants to demonstrate the sufficiency of the MSA. So in other words, if you get down the road and you've exhausted an MSA, in the new language, it's saying, okay, well, you can show to Medicare that your MSA was sufficient. Now, the cynic in me could say that, well, by definition, if you run out of money in the MSA, it was insufficient.
Yeah.
But it can't mean that. I don't think. And so I think, and this is the accepted interpretation of that in the industry right now, is that it means that that efficiency just means that you followed Medicare guidelines in the creation of the MSA in the first place. And if you did that, and you can demonstrate that the type of guidelines that you would need to follow if you were going to submit it to Medicare. And then finally, or in addition to that, you had to show that you used the funds in the MSA properly. And that if you do those two things, that Medicare could then choose at their discretion to go ahead and pay for further treatment upon exhaustion of the MSA. And then finally, I guess two more things. One is that it explicitly says that MSAs under the thresholds are exempted, but
under 25, to clarify, under 25,000.
Under 25,000 for current Medicare beneficiaries and under 250,000 for non-Medicare beneficiaries who are going to become so within 30 months or who have applied for Social Security disability. And now that doesn't mean, just as a side note, that you don't, in those under threshold MSAs or under threshold cases, that you don't need to consider and protect Medicare's future interests. It just means that not only should you not submit those MSAs for review, you can't. They're not going to review them. That's the threshold upon which they would review them. And then finally, they clarified this idea that it would be retroactively applicable. And they said, well, no, we're setting a line in the sand and we're saying that beginning January 11th, the day after the original edition, 2022, this year, that on a going forward basis that this is going to apply. So in other words, that took off the table this fear that people had that this applies to everything, every MSA that was ever created back to infinity. And so they clarified that as well. So the bottom line is the clarification was good. I think it answered a lot of questions. I do think there's some outstanding questions about sufficiency and things like that, but I think there's a reasonable interpretation of that. And so it's good that they did that.
Yeah, I'm really glad that they did that too. So just some follow-up questions that I think our viewers might want to hear. Do you think that attorneys representing parties to a workers' compensation claim are protected if they allow their client's claim to be settled via a non-submit MSA?
So it's a good question. So I think under the original language, the answer I would give is probably no. That it sure looks like this, or at least you would have to disclose to your claimant what the risk was, if they ever did exhaust the MSA. Now, I think with the clarified language, yeah, I think there are situations where you could settle and create an MSA and not submit the MSA. The thing you would need to be careful about is that you were, in my opinion, following Medicare guidelines in the creation of MSAs. I think, given the language they have, that you would be hard-pressed to create an evidence-based workers' comp MSA, for example, and not submit it, and then submit it later on upon exhaustion and expect Medicare to approve it as being sufficient. So I do think, or to say that differently, got to be a little bit more conservative in the creation of the MSA than maybe people were being.
Okay, gotcha. Another follow-up question. Often these non-submit MSA programs have some kind of an insurance coverage should the MSA be deemed by CMS as not adequate post-settlement. What is your opinion on what would happen if, in a claim, one of these insurance carriers providing coverage goes bankrupt or insolvent?
I think if in that scenario, if you got to the point where you exhausted the MSA funds and now you you apply to Medicare to show whether your MSA was sufficient or not. Now they deny that. They say no, it was not sufficient. And now you don't have this additional insurance policy available to you. I think at that point you're out of pocket. That for any further for any further treatment related to that injury or illness related to the settlement, Medicare is saying that they would deny payments or benefits. Now, in a situation like that, I would certainly suggest that a claimant, sit down with an attorney. If they're eligible for Medicaid and things like that, there could be other options, but there's, I think, issues with that as well. But yeah, it's one of the risks, and it would certainly need to be talked about with the claimant.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Greg. That's all the time we have for today. Really appreciate you jumping on and helping us get some clarification as to what CMS meant within their memos.
You bet. Happy to be here.
All right. Well, thank you folks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.